Joining me now is Arta Moeini, Dr. Arta Moeini. He is the research director at the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy. Thank you so much for joining me, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Saagar. Glad to be here.
So, Dr. Moeini, you caught my attention. You had a long Twitter thread and was backed up by an article. I wanted to put it up here on the screen. It is the Gaza War and the Twilight of International Moralism. So without getting too in the weeds, I think the takeaway that I had at the very least is that using moralistic language, genocide being one very much in vogue at the moment, but in general that we deploy in international politics is in some ways counterproductive and doesn't achieve the moral outcomes that those who use the term want. So why don't you give us your argument for why?
Yeah, sure. I think proponents of international law often sort of have very good intentions. They want to end conflicts. They want to minimize casualties, and they have this sort of attachment with this construct, which for me is a construct, an unnatural construct called international law. But the moralism that they attach to the framing of the world actually, in many ways, ideologizes conflicts, politicizes conflicts, demonizes others, and makes a kind of actual conversation that's required for diplomacy impossible. So I think by shaking or shedding our moralistic frames, by shedding our sort of needs for these kinds of ideological framings, we can actually, and prioritizing national interests and real power relations, we can develop a certain strategic empathy and either prevent conflicts from happening prior or to find solutions to them and resolve them more easily once they do arise.
So why don't you operationalize that to, let's say, the Israel conflict, like we said, using the word genocide, apartheid, all of these things, whether or not they're technically true or not, but even the definitions, the game itself, you view as counterproductive, let's say, to achieving an end, which I think we all want here, which is a peace to the conflict. What would your approach be then?
Yeah, so my framework is that if we adopt an actual sort of realistic view of the world and not look to demonize the other side. So, this happens on both sides. So when we think about Israel, I think it's very clear that the sort of opponents of Israeli policy use a certain framework of genocide language, labeling to demonize the other side. And I think that is very unhelpful because it actually kind of dehumanizes and discredits the other side, making them actually double down on the policies that I have a lot of problems with, and maybe many others do as well. But I think by doing that tactic actually is very unhelpful to getting them to change their policies. And it happens on the other side as well. This is not just a problem that, for example, the left has. The pro-Israel right, for example, uses similar kind of human rights discourse or moralizing language by trying to connect the sort of its own opponents to Hamas or calling them anti-Semites or whatnot. I think these kinds of rhetoric are a sort of a framework that come from ideology and actually thinking about a realistic understanding of how and why states do what they do and why power relations and how that's important in the sort of in the world, that can really change the dynamics on the ground. Think about, for example, I would just say this: in America, we have had a tradition of statesmanship going back to George Washington that emphasizes what I call, and with a colleague, Washingtonian realism, going back to George Washington, and it prioritizes national interests and looking at things as they are instead of focusing on ideology. And we can fast forward to the Cold War, and we have another classic realist like George Kennan, who also, while some hawks in Washington would like to read him as the as the force behind sort of military containment, actually understood that ideology cannot be fought through military force, and actually you need to find the real sources of conflicts and the political appeal of the ideology. So both of these can be applied to the Israel-Gaza scenario, because you can see how the very idea of Israel thinking that it can eliminate Hamas, as we know from our experience in Afghanistan with the Taliban, it's impossible to physically eliminate a sort of a non-state actor that is steeped in ideology. You have to find the reasons for their ideology and the spread of that ideology. So that's one thing. And then at the same time, you have to understand that, yes, Israel does have significant ontological insecurities and physical insecurities. And by trying to deal with them and telling them, for example, that, hey, it is not in Israel's long-term interest, a long-term national interest, to engage in this kind of behavior. And this is going to actually have fundamental consequences for the future of Israel itself. This will actually, I think, make the conversation on realist ground much better and much stronger, and towards a ceasefire or towards whatever resolution we can try to imagine.
Yeah, I get a lot of criticism when I talk in this way. People say that it's cold-blooded. And one of the things that I liked and took away from what you said is that you can actually achieve more moral outcomes, if you actually try and engage with this. If you look at things on a level playing field and you're not always using moral outrage or anger or, for example, I think the perfect example here is that the Biden administration is branding Russia's actions in Ukraine as genocide. But then they deny that it is a genocide whenever it's Israel and it's Gaza. And it's like, well, now you have a selective application of rhetoric to a term that was supposed to mean something. Now it actually means nothing. So arguably, you have made a disservice to any future ability to say anything about what is or is not a genocide. Whereas if instead that we look at it as like, this is bad, this is counterproductive to Russian interest, to Israeli interest, and others, then possibly the Russians would listen to us or the Israelis would listen to us, and vice versa, if we were to look at things actually level.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true, I think. And it actually, I think what you're bringing up is something that I also brought up in the article, which is the, yes, there is this sort of idea of hypocrisy in terms of selective application of U.S. Policy in regards to international law. But that really shows a different question, which is the fundamental problem of enforcement in international law. There is no real global hegemon. Now, once we shifted from unipolarity to multipolarity, and so we don't have an ultimate arbiter and an ultimate enforcer. So for so long as the United States we were in the unipolar moments of sort of American triumphalism, and the United States could select and pick and choose how to interpret international law, how to apply international law in different conflicts to serve its interests. Now, in the condition of multipolarity, using this sort of, we are now in a great transition. And within this great transition, we are seeing various different regions of the world. I don't like the term global south, but global south is the common term for it. The various multiple regions of the world are basically doing the same thing. The specter of interpretation is open to everyone. And so that actually means that what the United States specifically did since 1990, after the fall of the Soviet Union, we sort of shifted in the 90s to this sort of selective politicization of the international law framework, using human rights and using human rights as a weapon, using responsibility to protect, all of those things that we did, now others are doing as well. So almost for any conflict that you can think about in the world, you have the situation where Russia, for example, uses the very same argument that America used for NATO intervention in Serbia to justify its own intervention and aggression in Ukraine. And Ukraine also uses this, the same principles of the UN Charter in terms of self-defense and territorial integrity to make its own claim be shrouded in legitimacy. So again, all of these states are engaged in power. I mean, again, the relationship of power is key. And I think by not looking at the power relations and the fact that nowadays international law is used as an instrument for rhetorical and reputational influence and prestige. And you basically, once you do that, you get your side, your partisans, to accept your side of things and basically have legitimizing arguments for your side of things, and your opponents will have the opposite view and opposite interpretation. This is the problem of lack of enforcement that's inherent to international law as it is constructed, because again, the international law, the first word is international. We know, as any good realist would, that the international system is not actually a sort of a monolith. It doesn't have a sovereign, and therefore it is anarchic. The condition of anarchy is returning, where there is no unipolar order and no global sovereign like the United States that can get away with doing those arbitrations, still according to its interests, but it cannot get away with it anymore. And other countries are doing the same thing. So it means that effectively the dawn of multipolarity shows the tensions inherent to international law, because we cannot see it in an international way. We don't have that sort of enforcement mechanism. But that takes us to the second problem of international law as well, because international law is, again, the category of law is sovereign and sovereignty, that's at a domestic category. But also that implies that there are certain conventions, traditions, and shared heritage, let's say, that has given way to codifying those traditions as law. However, what we have now, this construct, this sacred cow of international law, is basically was premised on a particular code that was a European code that came out of the 19th and 20th century, but then it was codified in post 1945. So it's a particular parochial viewpoint of the world in a world that's actually diverse. So it doesn't have enforcement, but it also tends to universalize from a parochial position and basically try to make its position as the universal position, and the rest of the world that has different conceptions and different forms of life and different philosophies and different norms and values fundamentally now rejects that, but it increasingly has the power to say no and interpret it differently. So I think we need to get away from this international law framework because it's unhelpful for a peaceful and I would dare to say ethical relation between states that's based on some sort of regularity and rules, as proponents of the rules-based order like to say, that actually would happen when you prioritize power and think about power in that way. This mockery of power politics and real politics as something that's fundamentally immoral blinds us to the fact that seeing the world as it is instead of through the lens of ideology. And again, international law by definition is ideological because it reflects only one perspective of the world, and then it universalizes it. And it was contingent as well. So there's nothing natural about it. It was always ideological, and it gives us this framework which can be abused and instrumentalized and politicized, and actually makes the cause of peace much harder to achieve.
Well, really well said. My favorite is when people are like, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is illegal. I'm like, what, is there a legal invasion? There's no such thing as a legal invasion. Invasions are invasions. It's like casting this thing doesn't mean anything. Yeah. And if it is illegal, now what? Who's going to enforce it? Oh, you can't do anything about it? Well, then international law is fake. So I really appreciate you, sir. I really recommend people go. I'll put your Twitter account and everything in the description. Very interesting thinker. One who wants, I think, the same outcomes as many of the people who use this rhetoric, but is advocating for a different course, one that I endorse wholeheartedly. So thank you very much. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Saagar. Glad to be here.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.